This is The Hypothesis, the show where industry experts debate and discuss growth marketing approaches, digital advertising tactics, measurement plans, as well as creative and growth strategies.
I'm Eric Sloan, VP of Data and Strategy at Thrive Digital.
I'm Tyler Power, and I'm the Director of Creative Services here at Thrive.
I'm Maddie or Madeline, and I'm an Associate Director of Strategy here at Thrive.
I'm your moderator, lay marketer, and asker of clarifying questions, Santana Blanchett. Well, friends, welcome back to The Hypothesis. We've got some of our favorite returning guests. Not that we play favorites, but we always do a little bit. Today, we have asked you, our listeners, for questions. And so it is the Q&A episode. So today's hypothesis is that we can answer your questions, hopefully.
Cute.
Hopefully, yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah, I like that, yeah.
Who knows? Yeah.
You'll have to tell us.
So the first one that we've got here, and I kind of compiled a bunch of the questions together because a lot of them were along the same vein, was how we feel about the impact of AI ML tools like ChatGPT and the pace of change that they're causing in performance marketing. And then the other one that we had is about how AI is impacting consumers' trust of ads. So I think it's just like how is AI impacting us? And I know we've talked about this before about how we've been actually dealing with it for a while in the Google suite of tools. But I'm curious to hear how y'all think about AI and how it's impacting us.
Yeah, I mean, AI has been impacting performance marketing for a decade, right? Through enhancements to bidding and audience selection and all of these things, right? It's sort of a continuation of that. In terms of ChatGPT, that would be a large language model. So like specifically this group of models that you can kind of interact with and sort of talk to, kind of. I mean, I'm not sure. Like I use it all the time in my workflow in order to sort of bounce ideas around and that type of thing. Less on the marketing side, more on the technical side. So like more on the programming side. But I actually haven't seen it accelerating what we do specifically in performance marketing all that much yet. I would say it's almost overhyped in the short run, but underhyped in the long run. I think that it's, eventually it's going to be a part of everything that we do. Every marketing team is going to have to use it regularly. It's going to be trained on organizational data, and it'll just be a lot better at integrating into how organizations work. But yeah, today, I mean, like I'm not seeing it change performance marketing specifically all that drastically.
Yeah, I would agree. It's kind of like the marketer's best friend or sidekick at this point. I think everyone's using it. Everyone's quite happy with it as like a tool for, improving their individual understanding of a concept, or getting some syntax help for code or some idea generation for content. And then, as you said, Eric, I mean, it's been around behind the curtains for quite a long time in terms of how it influences marketers, though. It feels very still like independent or individual as opposed to organizational in terms of the change that it's causing.
From a creative perspective, I think it's still very much in its infancy. From an execution standpoint, I don't think anyone's comfortable going out there and using AI from an execution of concepts, but for idea generation, it works very well. ChatGPT, I wouldn't rely on to write copy because it's pretty easy to identify ChatGPT copy, but it can get you some ideas out there. I think AI in creative tools, though, are helping with efficiency. So things that used to take a long time in production, like photo manipulation, creating extra pixel information through an image that, you can't crop properly for certain formats, that kind of stuff is, unmatched now when it comes to like generative AI, and is very much helping us on the production side, where we used to take tasks that would take us, 30 minutes to an hour now take us 5-10 seconds, and we have something that we can use. We're also seeing a lot of clients that are sort of speaking out against AI and won't allow generative AI in their imagery, or won't allow us to source it, which makes total sense. But because brands become very particular and protective over their assets, we have to ask sort of permission even to create that extra pixel information, right? Because they focus so closely on specific product crops and image crops and things like that. So to step outside that and create additional AI information is a no-no in some cases. So
yeah, you almost run the risk of like having all the creative be like homogenous, right?
For sure.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
It is great for idea generation, though. Like you can obviously get that the AI looking stuff, but it gives you a baseline to jump off of and sort of add that sort of creative human touch to it. So it's almost like an extra teammate.
Yeah.
I think too, it depends on your brand, right? Because, like, to your point, it does have that very specific look and feel, and it's just not appropriate for some brand guidelines yet.
Yeah.
And the part two to that question is around trust. So I don't imagine any of us have shown up, or I don't even know if there's data available yet. But how do we feel like AI is impacting consumers' trust of ads, if it is at all?
I mean, I think it really depends on the content of those ads and whether they're spreading false information or correct information about the product or service. I guess there's a level of trust in whether the ad was generated by AI versus human, but that's a question of whether like those brands or businesses' target audiences care, or whether, you know, they care more about the message of the creative and whether that resonates with them and whether that excites them or whether it bothers them or whether it's, you know, false information. So for me, like, as long as, you know, the creative is not spreading misinformation, which of course is a risk, but I mean, we're still controlling, you know, the distribution of that messaging and content. I think like there's less of a risk in, you know, ruining the brand's reputation via AI generated images. But the bigger risk, which Eric was alluding to, was like creating really homogenous, boring content, because as we all know, like AI's great at repeating what it sees, but not as good at generating novel ideas and, you know, disrupting attention. So that might be a greater risk to a brand, is like over relying on AI generated creative and not expanding, you know, the types of messages that they're testing or being able to reach new audiences.
Yeah, unless you want to like an avocado sunbathing by a pool or something, then it's really good at generating images like that. I think that the trust thing, at least from my perspective, is more on the like organic content side, right? Because brands that are still putting money behind ads are putting money behind it, right? And so like they're operating in the same way. Like you might be able to speed up the sort of time to market of idea to creative and market, but at the end of the day, they're still putting money behind it, right? Whereas the trust factor, I think, is impacted a lot more by organic content, because that speed has been, or that time to getting something, you know, up on Facebook or Instagram, et cetera, is just so short now, and you can produce so much of it, one person, that it's just sort of able to flood social media with those messages, right?
I think we got to give the consumer credit as well where credit is due. It's pretty easy to sniff this stuff out, whether you trust it or not. That has a look, it has a sound, it reads a certain way. And, you know, I constantly in these episodes allude to my children, but my kids can pick it out.
For now.
Yeah, for now. But I was my Instagram the other day, and my son was kind of peeking over my shoulder. And he's like, "That's AI." I was like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, that's AI." I was like, "How can you tell?"
My partner does that all the time too, and he gets really angry when he sees people commenting on posts that are clearly AI with like disbelief of like, "Oh, that's a real place," and he's like, "That's AI."
Same with my son. It like drives him crazy. He doesn't like the fact that it's fake. So if a 10-year-old boy can pick it out, I hope that, you know, the majority of our user base can pick it out too, and make a decision based on that. So
We had a lot of questions, I think, that are kind of getting into the weeds here a little bit, and I'm curious about. A lot of people are wondering about monthly reporting from agencies, like what they should be looking for, if there's anything around ad performance that they can measure monthly, like just kind of agency reporting relationship.
Definitely think you should see a metric that compares, you know, the total marketing investment against its output, or essentially, you know, the business metric that you care about, whether that's revenue or first time revenue or new customer acquisition or sales. Essentially having a market efficiency ratio or ad cost over sales or a CAC metric, I think I would want to see monthly. Not all agencies provide that. Not all clients are even looking for that because they might have access to that information internally. But I think if you're not seeing that, it raises a question of whether that agency is focused on the right information to drive their decision making. I think you should also be looking at total online traffic broken down by the different marketing channels that are driving that. You should be looking at definitely, you know, attributed results from all of the channels, whether that's through like the independent channel attribution or an MTA tool. You should be looking at those and leveraging those results to some degree in monthly reporting, as long as you're also breaking down those results by channel and tactic. and you have an understanding of the different assumptions that go into that attributed reporting. But yeah, you could be using MTA or channel attribution, but you should definitely use those as an additional signal for monthly performance by channel, by tactic, down to, campaign level, looking at things like top creatives versus worst creatives month over month, top regions versus worst regions, top keywords, like all of that stuff is really useful for those bigger insights about, where you're generating demand and what is resonating with the audience. I think is all kind of things you should expect in monthly reporting.
I tend to come back to this idea of like, is it helping you make a decision or is it just interesting? Right. And I think that we can get in this trap when it comes to digital marketing. There's so much data that we just want to sort of like provide a ton of data and we want to sort of look at all of the different pieces. But at the end of the day, anything that's not a KPI is kind of more of a diagnostic metric, right? And so there are certain KPIs that the business is trying to track towards. Those should be front and center. They should always be tied back to business results, not things like, CPC or just impression volume or something like that. There needs to be some kind of context which ties those things back to the performance of the business. But really, it needs to be a tool for helping marketing teams to make decisions. I think generally where I sort of draw the line is, between a dashboard and kind of like more granular reporting would be when the dashboard is asked to be a tool, when it's asked to be sort of an insights tool or having too many drill downs and those types of things. I personally much prefer to push that off to something like Google Sheets or something along those lines. It allows you to get closer to the data. And really, having both of those tools can really be helpful. You have a dashboard to get a quick understanding of how KPIs are tracked, and then you get this more granular view, which allows you to make all sorts of slices and all of that.
Yeah, from a creative perspective, obviously we look at all of the metrics and KPIs that Eric and Maddie mentioned. They're important to us: CTR, CPA, CPM, CPL, ROAS, conversion rate, all that. But selfishly, if you are looking at diagnosing and analyzing creative, I think you should also be looking at things like hook rate, depending on what platform you are on. Could be interpreted as thumb stop, hold rate, view throughs, video completions, things like that are going to start to give you a little bit more insight into your overall creative performance outside of those sort of revenue tied metrics, to start making decisions on how you can optimize creative, how you can test creative properly, and pulling out those pieces of the ads that are performing so that you can leverage them and port them over into your ongoing creative evergreen or your optimizations, or however you're optimizing your creative moving forward.
I think it's all like contextual, right? Like,
yeah,
I think we should be looking at things like hook rates and things, to your point, Tyler. But we probably shouldn't be putting it on the same line as, your revenue, revenue, hook rate, and putting it all in one box. Yeah. These are your monthly metrics. We need to have a creative report where the primary metrics are what you're speaking to versus more of a top line program report, which has some of the metrics that I was speaking to or Eric was speaking to.
Yeah, for sure.
Like an onion. You peel back the layers, right? Tyler, you know this better than I do, but it's like a user experience kind of foundation, right? It's like you want things to be simple when you first look at them, and then you want that complexity to sort of be revealed as you dive deeper. Yeah.
The next question here then is, how long will it take for a campaign to start showing results? And I think it's fair we can add as many caveats as we want around this, because I know that really depends on where you're at in the funnel. And
yeah, there's a lot of caveats to that.
There's a lot there, yeah.
This is a very common question in performance marketing, obviously, because everything is meant to be very short term and generate results immediately within a day, within an hour. So I think that a lot of performance marketers are very versed in answering this question, as are the advertising platforms. Like, they will typically have this thing called a learning phase where when you first launch a campaign or an ad set with your creatives and your audience targeting, that is going to be in the learning phase. We can't expect performance to be very strong because these campaigns are typically leveraging machine learning algorithms to go and find the best user to show the ad to get as much results as we can. And so I guess Meta, for example, says ideally we have enough, like about 50 conversion actions that we've driven for this ad set until we're out of the learning phase. So I guess there's that point, is that no matter what, anything you launch, there's going to be a period of learning, at least for a week, but it could be a few weeks. It's obviously also going to be totally dependent on the customer sales journey that you expect for the business. I guess what results you expect and when you expect to drive them based on the media that you're running and the objective of the media. But I guess to simplify the answer, I would say like anywhere from 1 to a few weeks for something that's new, and it could be longer. It depends on how you define the results that you expect to see.
And you just touched on it, the life cycle, right? Like a B2B software that is worth however many hundreds of thousands of dollars and takes migration is going to be different than a widget.
Yeah, totally.
I think it also depends on what you define as results, right? So like, are we talking, profitable, sustainable? Are we talking just like the very first sale, et cetera? Like all of these different things take different amounts of time. Like, do you have any historical data? Do you have your messaging figured out? How much market share do you have? Like all of these things are going to impact sort of the growth curve of those campaigns, right? If you're running something in the mid funnel, the full sort of result or the full impact of that spend might take a few months to actually play out, right? And so anything you measure in the short term is just going to be the short term impact, right? And so, really understanding sort of what results you're looking for can be really helpful when designing a marketing program, because you wouldn't say, hey, we want to drive a whole bunch of sales in the next 2 weeks and then go out and run a bunch of reach campaigns or digital out of home or something like that, right? So like they're not going to match up, right? And so being crystal clear about like what results means, I think is the first step.
Yeah, absolutely. And then how those results are going to appear for you, because they might not appear in a nice little advertising UI. If you're trying to say measure sales lift off of top of funnel, they won't appear in an advertising UI.
So every caveat.
Yeah, every caveat. Well, I have another question sort of tied to this for Tyler too. Like, I'm curious what you think is the sort of timeline between a let's say an organization that is just starting to experiment with creative messaging to the point where they've sort of gotten that messaging figured out and they've really found that messaging to market fit.
Yeah, I guess we kind of get this question all the time, and it depends where the brand is in their sort of life cycle, right? We see brands that are established and they have a tone of voice that they believe to be working, and that's sort of set in stone for us, and we constantly try to push outside that to challenge that. Often we come up against brick walls, but once in a while we get a brand that's like, okay, let's see what you have and put us out of our comfort zone. We see clients coming in and they want us to work on 2-week sprints. And sometimes I think that's not long enough from a creative perspective. Like, we haven't learned enough and they haven't been out there in market long enough for us to get statistical significance or to give them the opportunity to challenge ads that have, top performance. To your point, Maddie, one of the sort of KPIs was top performers, low performers. Some of those top performers have been in market for months and the algorithm is feeding them and they are serving them more and more just because they are the top performers. So sometimes we like to see them go out and stay out a little bit longer. We get a lot of pressure to get into those 2-week sprints because they want volume. They want to see more. They want to, they want to find a winner. They want to, beat the challenger. And I feel like sometimes they just need to let those things sit in market a little bit and allow the algorithm to feed them and serve them a little bit more. The tone of voice stuff is interesting because I think the tone of voice tends to change also depending on where you are in the funnel, what the actual theme is, right? If you're doing sort of brand awareness, you usually have a brand tone of voice. If you're doing testimonials, it's a little bit different. If it's feature benefit, it's also a little bit different. So that's sort of a loaded question. And when it comes to that kind of messaging, it comes down to almost thematic messaging and where we're speaking to these individuals within their journey.
So even more caveats.
Yeah, even more caveats. So many variables once you bring the creative stuff in as well. Yeah.
Listen, we know there's no one size fits all. It's good. When does it make sense to take performance marketing in-house versus outsourcing to an agency? And I just want to, I think all of our listeners know by now, we work for an agency. So that's our bias declaration.
We're biased slightly. Is that what you're trying to say? Yeah. I
don't think we're a hammer that everything looks like a nail too, but just worth stating.
I feel like it comes down to, is your team big enough to actually have enough diversity of ideas to, feed itself, right? I mean, like one of the big advantages of an agency is that, you're working with marketers that like are exposed to multiple projects and like of different sizes in different markets and, different contexts, all of these things. And I mean, we just spent 10 minutes talking about caveats with, campaign performance and creative and all of that. I mean, is your team capable of basically understanding those caveats and continuing to learn? Building an in-house marketing team is an investment. I think that, looking at it from the perspective of like, hey, our agency is doing X amount of production, so all we have to do is replace that production is short-sighted. So you really want to also have, is there enough outside ideas coming into the team? Is there enough leadership on that team? Do you have enough redundancy that if someone left or two people left, would your entire marketing program come to a halt, or would budgets get out of control? Those types of things, right? And so I think that all of that needs to factor into a decision like that. It's not just about saving a few points of ROI in terms of the program.
Yeah, I think you have to be ready too. I think a lot of marketing teams, internal teams, specifically when they're trying to venture into performance marketing, they often put that on their internal creative teams or their brand teams. And they don't have that expertise that like, graphic design or traditional design or product design doesn't necessarily always parlay over into performance marketing. And so we often see, brands come to us and be like, we tried, it didn't work. They're missing the mark on certain things. And our performance partners see that too, right? They get handed assets and like, these are not built for performance creative. These are billboards or brochures that have been sort of transformed into a piece of performance creative, and they're lacking all of the sort of best practice and elements and tone of voice and messaging that make them conversion-based ads. So I think there is a steep learning curve there, even though it seems simple. We see clients come on a lot and be like, we don't understand, our team doesn't understand. Can you help us? And so our relationship usually, turns into them gaining and garnering that experience over a period of time until they feel comfortable with it. And then it kind of transforms into this consultancy, right? But they need to be handheld a little bit to the point where they're ready and they feel comfortable taking on that piece.
Yeah, I would agree with everything Eric and Tyler said. Do you have the maturity? Do you have the diverse, skill sets? Do you have the thought leadership? I see so many LinkedIn posts now that are like, you can't make your digital marketing manager do everything. I think that a lot of companies want to just say, hey, you're marketing, take on paid ads too, take on, this and that. And I think a lot falls by wayside when we try to force too much generalization. The benefit of an agency is not that like you have people who are skilled in managing the platforms, because ultimately that's not a super large learning curve. It is that like diversity of experience across managing tons and tons of clients across tons and tons of verticals and running that and consulting and collaborating on that across so many people and building up that thought leadership in that space, so that, a ton of money isn't wasted and that there's more confidence behind the strategy there.
Are you saying that you are not out there looking for those unicorn roles, Maddie? You're not looking to be the marketing ninja in-house?
All hats.
All hats.
Wear every hat.
We should start changing unicorn postings to hat rack postings. We are looking for a digital marketing hat rack.
That's sad.
We've got a spicy question next. What is a performance marketing trend that needs to stop? Is there a specific paid media trend that too many agencies or marketers are relying on lately?
I mean, trusting data too much, I think. And that comes from me being the VP of data. But I've done quite a few interviews in my career. And when you interview digital marketers, oftentimes you get this answer of like, hey, I'm in this industry because you can measure everything. You can understand everything. It's like the data doesn't lie, that kind of thing. And I think that the data lies all the time, right? It can be misinterpreted. It can flat out lie. Like your assumptions about the data can be wrong. There's so many potential pitfalls with just being completely data driven instead of data informed. And I think that, the industry is starting to understand that, I think, and there is a bit of a shift that I feel anyways. And yeah, I would say that that's definitely a trend that I'm happy to have die is that, data can solve all of our problems and it can answer all the questions that we ask.
But with that, adaptation comes the risk of essentially introducing a lot more bias and cherry picking into decision making, which is, this data, we know it's fake. We're going to go with what we think.
Wasn't the bias always there though? There's so many teams that look at the data and just like make up their mind anyways.
Yeah, it's true. It's going to be an ongoing thing. But yeah, agreed on that one for sure. I would also add, and I'm sure I've mentioned this before on one of these podcasts, but just the over reliance of the, like the packaging and the marketing of new campaign types is like totally new inventory or a net new way to target audience members by these big advertising platforms, Google and Meta, namely, and calling those new campaign types strategy. It's not strategy, it's a casing. So I think what you put into that campaign type in terms of creative, your audience targeting approach, the guardrails you place on that campaign, how much budget you decide to invest in relation to everything else you're doing, what you learn about that and how that shifts, your treatment of that campaign. That's the strategy. And I think we need to stop, saying, hey, this new campaign type is going to get us XYZ, because it is really just a casing for buying and selling inventory that is not new. Like, it's never new.
Mine's going to be a hot take, probably just coming off a rough week with said trend or tactic, but UGC.
I knew you were going to say that. Yeah, that's another one of those.
Yeah, I know.
That's another one of those buzzwords right now, UGC. So
it is. It can't be the be all and end all. It can be a part of your sort of marketing mix, but don't put all your eggs in that basket. I think the beauty of it coming out of the gate was the idea of that it was so authentic. But I think we're starting to see a little bit of a retro on it, and it's becoming less and less authentic because they're trying to make it so authentic, if that makes sense. Also, it's not as economical as it used to be, right? People know that there's money to be made there. They understand how marketers are using these as advertisements or using them as whitelisting efforts. And so, they're not down for just, product in kind or flow of product. They want to be paid, and they know the money that's being made off of these things. And so not only does it starting to cost more, but it also makes some creators and influencers, and this I don't want this to be a blanket statement, but makes it more difficult to source, manage, and get the content that we're looking for, because they know it's so in demand and is such a huge part of sort of the marketing arsenal right now. So be very careful about how you use it, where it fits in, and use it appropriately. It's not the answer for all brands. We see a lot of brands that, like I said in past episodes, that try and control the overall look and feel of it, and it comes off inauthentic and fake. It works for some brands and it doesn't work for others. So
does that sort of speak to like another trend, which is sort of like this chasing of what has worked for someone else? Where like, in digital marketing in general, like there's so many people out there talking about, hey, this worked for me or that worked for me, etc. This button color works better than this other button color, or rounded corners works better than squared corners, etc. And just this idea of just like, hey, if we just try this thing, it's going to solve our problem. Right. And that in itself is it's just not true. Right. Like the better way to approach that, like what you said, Tyler, in terms of UGC is like, start with the assumption that UGC can be a part of your program, and like, where would it fit in, and why would it benefit the brand, and why would it benefit, our customers? Why would our customers even care? And like those types of things, if you start there, then it seems to make a lot more sense than, hey, I read this in a blog post from one of our competitors that it was working, so we have to try it.
There's no silver bullet.
No.
What may be a silver bullet for one brand, one client, one product, one vertical will not be the same for you. All right.
Right.
So depends who your user base is, your audience, what your product is. Yeah, I think people see the efficacy of certain tactics in certain places and be like, oh, that's got to be the answer, and then are heavily disappointed when it's not.
Right.
It is still valuable though to listen to what's worked for other brands. I
Oh,
think
for
that's
sure.
a really big benefit of, this market moves very fast, and things like UGC work really well for the first movers, and can have bigger advantages when you listen to those early trends. And then of course everyone starts doing that thing, and you start to see it doesn't work for everyone, but
No.
it's definitely great to listen to people, but don't use that as like, I guess, the shortcut to avoiding kind of addressing the bigger business objectives and concerns.
I got one more real quick, Santana. Stop incentivizing blended ROAS, combining ROAS in like from all platforms and such, and sort of like setting a target for this is just a horrible incentive for your marketing program. It just causes a race to the bottom, and it drives low incremental output, low business impact essentially. And I wish that trend would stop. I wish that we would focus less on return on ad spend.
Yeah, that's a good one.
We have many, many, many data and measurement episodes that I will link to.
I know.
If anyone wants to dive deep in that.
I'm stopping it there.
No, I don't want to hold you back. If anyone's really curious as to what he's saying, I'm not asking follow-up questions, but I will direct you to some really great resources. So this person is wondering how paid media teams and agencies can better communicate and work with creative agencies and teams. And I kind of want to throw this to Tyler first, because I think it's actually kind of rare that Thrive has like a performance creative department in terms of like some of the other just pure traditional agencies and how media used to be, right? So I'm curious for you as a creative, how you feel like you've learned how to work with the nerd side.
That's okay.
Eric's like, hello, I'm attacked.
That's a two-part question. The nerd side, that wasn't very nice. When I first came into this, I definitely sort of thought that, right? I was like, oh man, this is totally separate. I don't know how we're ever going to get along. What I do is so subjective, and what you do is not. It's very cut and dry for the most part. But I quickly saw the value in it. And coming from a traditional agency side where, we would pitch and go to RFP and compete basically on portfolio against portfolio, or logo garden against logo garden. And if they saw a logo they liked, or they saw a piece of work they liked, that usually meant that, that agency had the upper hand. And the data side and the, performance side sort of switched that for me. Now I could point to something. I could point to performance. I could point to results. I could point to efficacy of my creative and point to the reasons why. And that all of a sudden gave me an upper hand. And so that was like a huge sort of turning point in my career, coming from that traditional side over to the performance side. Working with client partners now that are just sort of branching in or trying to delve into the performance side and make that a part of their overall media mix has been interesting, because a lot of them don't have the expertise or the function in-house that understand it. So that in turn means they don't have the process for that to take place. And that creates, some rigmarole, I would say, to put it lightly. And so we need to establish that process first. But one of the big things is also ensuring that not only that our team, our creative team and our performance team are communicating, but so are their marketing team and their brand team, because where it starts to unravel on the performance side is in the process where we get to a point where we have an ad and we need that ad to be approved. We need that copy to be approved. We need that visuals to be approved. And oftentimes on the client side, their marketing team or their performance side is not speaking with their brand side. And so consolidating those teams on that side, or at least having a brief that's agreed to on that side by both parties prior to us doing our work, is like core to moving quickly and getting stuff out there. Because we see so much back and forth on the client side right now, where we're like, we get through the marketing team, it's almost approved, like, hold on, we got to put it by brand. And then all of a sudden, it
blows up.
We're in revision 6, 7, and 8 because of that, because there wasn't line of sight and communication there, because of the things that we do on the performance side. Not that we don't stick to brand standards and brand guidelines, but there's a few rules that sometimes we need to break in order for our creative and our product to align with best practices and convert. And those things haven't been taken into account on the client side.
I'm curious about your perspective as well, Tyler, on this sort of sharing of insights within the marketing, I guess the entire marketing ecosystem, right? So over on SEM or even in SEO, like here are what people are searching for, like here are the actual phrases that they're using to search for these products or this brand or whatnot. Here's the type of copy that's working in search campaigns, from the CRO team or something like that. Like here's the learnings that we've gotten over the last 18 months from, landing page optimization or like calls to action that work and videos that work on landing pages and those types of things. Like, is there an opportunity as well for like that whole ecosystem to just get better at communicating?
Oh, most definitely. And when we go through our creative discoveries, we ask for all that. We'll take any and all pieces of information that we can that can help us inform a creative decision, whether they've run legacy search campaigns, keywords, CRO, anything. I've said in the past that sort of where we operate, lower in the funnel is the perfect proving ground and testing ground for all things to sort of trickle actually upwards towards sort of that more top of funnel traditional stuff. So we'll take all that and take it into consideration. Maddie touched on it earlier. We love to see top performers, but we also love to see low performers. Like, we don't want to recreate anything that hasn't functioned in the past, but we also want to see what that low performer is when it comes to messaging, whatever, because there may be a slight tweak that we can make to make it all of a sudden become a top performer, right? So we'll take any and all information from any part of the ecosystem that will potentially, supercharge an ad for us and make it that a top performer that we're looking for. Like I said, sometimes it's only a minuscule sort of adjustment and optimizations that's the difference between a low performer and a high performer.
Interesting.
Other hot take question. What recommendations are clients sick of hearing? Is there anything specifically you've seen clients pushing back on lately when it comes to performance marketing?
Yeah, I mean, I think clients are sick of hearing recommendations that are more so grounded in an adherence to best practices in performance marketing. One, because performance marketing and marketing in general changes so often that, how much should we be loyal to these best practices? And another, because normally when that is the recommendation, it belies kind of a rigidity and like a desire not to be testing different things. It's almost a lazy response, or it can be seen as a lazy response by clients. So I think, and we see, like, for example, with performance marketing, the trend over the past few years has been consolidate. You need enough signal, roll everything into one campaign, one ad set, and go wild and favor broad audiences over specific audiences. Audience signal is dying anyways. And now we're seeing with many of our clients that actually more segmented audience approaches can actually help increase unique reach and, bring down the cost that we're seeing to reach new customers. So clients don't want to hear no, because that's not best practice. They want to hear that we're willing to test and learn and take approaches that will, suit their audience and their product.
You heard it here first. Maddie hates best practices.
Yeah, I'm so obvious.
I think that's highly dependent on who you're working with, right? Like, it depends on the level, like how savvy and how sophisticated the clients are. Some people need to start at the fundamental level and need to, like sort of any technical skill set, start with the basics. And those might be best practices, especially if they aren't practicing those best practices yet. We've been put in front of clients on big brands that we think, okay, these guys are going to be done. Let's come in here, guns blazing, and come out with, sort of out of the box thinking. And you've quickly realized that they haven't even started with the basics yet. So you have to kind of read the room. You have to kind of understand who you're speaking with and where they are within their creative or performance marketing life cycle in order to make those recommendations. We've had clients that, have told us straight out, don't come in here next time and tell me something that I already know. And so that's probably more alluding to who you're speaking about, Maddie. And so you do in those cases have to think outside the box and come with, not your sort of square strategies. But some of them you definitely need to start at a fundamental level and work your way up. So.
I completely agree. I think the biggest thing is that, like, typically when you're making recommendations, you're trying to improve performance. You need to make some level of change. And what I think clients are sick of hearing is, we can't change this because we're already established at XYZ best practice, when ultimately the best case scenario is that we're constantly changing and testing new things, but we have a foundation that we're working from that is grounded in some level of best practice or historical insights that we've gathered over time.
I think something too that's interesting is I think you guys are going to have such different perspectives on this because, at least in my experience, for so long, anything to do with creative and an agent, like in the marketing side, lived with brand, right? Like, it's very new to have performance creative. Like, that's very new. So I think there's not a base level of like sophistication or experience or even like client side liaisons there. It's just creative lived with brand, and brand speaks a different language than performance, I imagine.
Yeah, and that's why they're separate in a lot of cases, which is not right. It makes it so difficult. You need to figure out a way to combine those two within those relationships, because like I said, I spoke to it a little bit earlier, but it makes things very difficult if those two factions are siloed within the client relationship.
And then our final question is back to the question on everyone's mind all the time, constantly: reporting. So do you have any tips or tricks that you can share on reporting, dashboards, and generally providing more clear information and data for clients, specifically those who might require a more generalized explanation of performance? So how are we breaking down reporting to clients that maybe need a little more hand-holding on this?
Well, I mean, one thing I said above is, like, you don't want to have like 20 metrics next to each other, especially if your clients are a little bit less sophisticated in interpreting all of those metrics. That's really messy. It's really not conductive to, prioritizing the right information. And you can get into, big segues and waste of time if you're looking at 20 scorecards and one of them is 20% higher CTR week over week, and now we're down a rabbit hole and there's this big investigation and time has been completely wasted when that had nothing to do with the top line. I think so. Don't include 20 metrics, maybe include the 3 most important ones. If you do have a reason to have more metrics, make sure there's a hierarchy so that the more important ones are bigger. Recognize, the more information you include, the more you are increasing the opportunity for a lot more distraction and going down the rabbit path.
I think we've all been in that meeting. I think every single person that is in advertising or in marketing, agency or client side, has been in a meeting with it just down the rabbit hole, too much information on a slide.
Yeah, and it's like it comes from a good place. But one of the things we've done in the past is we've built trackers that kind of help us look at the normal distribution of metrics over time and understand what actually constitutes an outlier that we should investigate versus what is just normal fluctuation in those metrics. So maybe we don't go down the rabbit hole and waste our time looking into that. But I think even before we get there, just making sure it's not in the view of the client who might want to poke holes is part of, I think, more strategic reporting.
Yeah, less is more. Decide what the actual KPIs are. There can't be 20 key performance indicators, right? There's a certain number of indicators of performance, and then all the rest are diagnostic metrics, right? So you use those other metrics to understand what's going on, but they shouldn't be front and center. You don't need that many metrics to understand whether things are performing or not, right? And the KPIs that you do select should also tie back in some way to the performance of the business, right? And so, you should understand that relationship. And so, a challenge that I would give to any marketing team is like, if you're optimizing towards CPC, well, explain how CPC is tied to business results, right? And so you need to be sort of clear on what your assumption is about like what that connection is. And if you are crystal clear on it and, your executive team has buy-in and all that kind of stuff, maybe it is a KPI, but chances are slim that that's actually the case, right? And so there's other metrics that you may want to be looking at, which are going to drive business performance. So that would be a really key piece. The other thing that I think about is, understanding the context behind either a leading or a lagging indicator, right? And so if you're looking at revenue, that's going to be a lagging indicator, right? So it's happening after all of the marketing activity that you've already done, right? Well, there's a bunch of leading indicators which can, help to tell the story about what's going to happen over the next 6 weeks or 8 weeks. Direct and organic sessions, those types of things. Even if you're a performance marketer and you're focused on your Meta and your Google ads, you should still be looking at those other metrics to understand the ecosystem of what's going on around the business. So,
and look at year over year. Definitely don't just look at week over week. Month over month is great, but also contextualize things in bigger time periods. It helps get out of the weeds and kind of actually see what's going on. So make sure you have bigger time kind of frame views, and that you're not just looking at everything like as a day over day. You're looking at different time frames.
Just a slot machine, hoping something comes different. Tyler, was there anything else you wanted to add before we?
In your dashboards, make sure you got a creative dashboard for the metrics that I pointed out. Can be separate, obviously, from the sort of revenue-based ones, but it's important. So hold rate, hook rate, view through, completions. If you have a nice creative dashboard, that's going to help you make the proper decisions based around your creative performance.
Well, thanks for answering everyone's questions. Hopefully we were correct in our hypothesis that we could answer them for you. If not, my email inbox is open to any follow-up and or complaints or feedback. Thank you all for joining me today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.
This has been The Hypothesis. Thank you so much for tuning in. For show notes or to get in touch, find us at thehypothesisshow.com or at Thrive Digital, both linked for you in our description box. And if you liked today's episode, we'd love if you'd rate and review wherever you're listening or watching. Thanks!